The big good news last night was that Canada got rid of their digital service tax, and Hassett says we are back to negotiating with Canada. Now, we still haven't made progress on that, but of course, we're going to break down all of the other things that just happened as well. Donald Trump spoke on Fox News this weekend in quite an extended interview. Besson spoke, Hassett spoke, a lot of updates. I'm just going to give you the bottom line of what was said. Here's what you have to pay attention to. First, Donald Trump on tariffs makes it clear that we're probably looking at assigned rates coming for other countries, likely in the neighborhood of 20 to 25%. That's sort of the implication that I got from what he was talking about, for countries that don't end up making straight up tax deals or tariff deals with the United States. He also says that, Kevin Hassett, Scott Besson, and Donald Trump all sort of echo that there's 200 countries that they have to negotiate with. So they can't negotiate with everyone, and so some countries are just going to get assigned tariff rates. I'm not sure if this is going to be like a Liberation Day 2.0 or what, because a lot of these countries right now are at the 10% baseline reciprocal tariff level. And that's going to be increased back to 20 or 25, maybe even Trump says 35, 40, or 50%, depending on whatever Donald Trump wants to do. No real indication that any actual progress has been made with a deficit country on negotiations just yet. Donald Trump also says that he has 3 people in mind to replace Powell, likely Kevin Hassett, Scott Besson, and there are some other names as well, including some like Waller, who are already over at the Fed. And this is, I think, why we're seeing a lot of people from the Fed already start indicating like, hey, yeah, we're open to seeing rate cuts sooner, because everybody knows that Donald Trump wants to see lower rates. And a lot of people seem to be applying for the job by pitching how much lower rates should be going. For example, Besant this morning made this interesting comment about the Fed. He says the Fed has done bad things in the past. They've made mistakes, specifically referring to the transitory inflation problem that we had in the past. And Besant says that the Fed is kind of like an old person, and he didn't use the phrase old person because they're all old, but he said it's kind of like a person who has fallen. Now they spend most of their time like looking down at their feet to be a little bit more confident in their footing, and they're likely to mess up again. So in other words, the Fed was late to raise rates. They'll likely be late to reduce rates now, and this is why we need to reduce rates. Now, one of the downsides of reducing rates potentially is we're actually seeing the US dollar basically fall at the fastest rate that we've seen since we left the gold standard for the first 6 months of any year. This was pretty remarkable. The Financial Times put this piece together, and I think it's an accurate point to look at and say, yeah, the dollar's kind of been getting whacked. Part of the reason for that is this anticipation of this pricing in of more rate cuts in the future. Here's that Financial Times piece. US dollar suffers worst start since 1973. That's when we left the gold standard. A lot of people see this as a risk of de-dollarization. Others and market participants see this as really just sort of balancing out the trade issue that we have. It's sort of like the currency market is absorbing some of the trade issues. So this sounds a little complicated, but think about it this way. If we put a 10% tariff on a country to buy US goods, let's say, computer for $100, or I'll call it $1,000, right? Tariff is 10%. If dollar falls in value by 10%, then the dollar became cheaper to buy, and in euro terms, let's say this is $1,100 total, right? In euro terms, it's possible that computer is still $1,000. Basically, the currency market acts as a buffer to tariffs. And so that's one of the reasons why the dollar is falling. A lot of people do worry that the dollar falling is because of de-dollarization. And it makes sense. You could look at, for example, the ETF U up, which would be US dollar up. It's the bullish ETF for the dollar. It's one of them. There are many of them, but whatever. I don't have any affiliation with it. But it's interesting because you have seen this pretty sharp decline. This is on the week chart over here. This is one of the more severe declines that we've seen even since 2022, really going all the way back to 73. And so a lot of people are like, oh no, this is de-dollarization. People are escaping. BRICS are going to take over. And I get that. Like you do see that where, global investors are being prompted to rethink their exposure to the world's dominant currency. The independence of the Fed is being questioned. Tariffs. There's a lot going into what's affecting the dollar to fall. And it makes sense. It kind of aligns with what we're hearing today because you've got, again, Donald Trump suggesting we're going to assign higher tariff rates. Okay, well, that potentially means the dollar is going to fall even more. If you get a new Fed chair in May of 26, where we're talking about faster rate cuts, the dollar might fall even more. In fact, for our July meeting, we used to have essentially a 0% chance of getting a rate cut in July. That is now as high as 19%. And the odds of a September rate cut are now as high as 91.9%. And we are now fully pricing in 3 rate cuts by my birthday, January 28th, 2026. So we'll see by the end of 2026, we price in 5 rate cuts. So 3 by January and 2 more in 2026. Now remember, there are companies like Morgan Stanley that are like, nah, we're going to end up having to have 7 cuts or more. Mind you, here's an example of a clip of Donald Trump on the Maria interview, which we're summarizing right now. So that's a little bit on the Fed and Powell and tariffs. Still TBD on deadlines. Donald Trump says that he can extend the tariff deadline, no big deal, just like he does with TikTok, where he kind of keeps kicking the can down the road on the TikTok deal at 90 days, 90 days, 90 days. One of the reasons I think he's doing that is because he kind of has to. Donald Trump has to get approval from TikTok for the TikTok sale, or from China for the TikTok sale to occur. And China's obviously going to incorporate that into their trade negotiations. And I don't think China wants to stay at 55% tariffs. So these negotiations are likely to just keep going on for a while, which of course begs the question of like, okay, well, like how long can they keep going? Well, technically they just keep going forever. And we could have years of trade negotiations. In fact, if you go back to 2018, when we had Trade War 1.0, the trade negotiations went on for over 2 years, and they only really stopped because of COVID. Now, of course, you do get indicators from companies like both or research publications from the Chicago Business Barometer and the Dallas Fed Manufacturing Survey, both of them indicating some weaker numbers than expected for June. These are the first 2 weeks of June. And a lot of folks are concerned that our economy just isn't going to be able to hold up the labor market as long as it's going to take to get these tariff negotiations done. I personally am of the mindset that we're not going to end up seeing tariffs show up in consumer price inflation. So in other words, no higher prices. I actually think it's more likely to show up in fewer jobs. So we'll see what happens. We do have jobs data coming out this week. On Wednesday, we'll get the ADP survey expecting 90K jobs. And the Fed survey will be a day early this week on Thursday, since Friday is July 4th's holiday and the market will be closed. And on Thursday, we're expecting 113,000 on the BLS labor report. I would expect that anything under 100 or like anything under 50 would be really bearish. Anything above 150 would be pretty bullish. We'll see. So then what we have is Donald Trump giving us an update on Iran. So Donald Trump is of the mindset that Iran did not move the 400 pounds of enriched uranium, that it's been destroyed and it's nothing to worry about. That the last thing Iran is thinking about right now is reactivating their nuclear program, and there's nothing to worry about here. That said, you do get some posters on social media saying things like this. According to intercepted communications recently between senior Iranian officials obtained by the United States and as reported by the Washington Post, so this is Jeff Bezos' paper, typically deemed a little bit more left-leaning, so potentially likely to want to poop on Trump, so keep the bias in mind. Last weekend, strikes by the U.S. Air Force and Navy against 3 existing nuclear facilities in Iran was less devastating and extensive than they had expected, sparking concerns currently circulating within the U.S. government that the Iranian nuclear program could resume. Some people are saying within the next few months, some are saying within the next few weeks. Donald Trump's camp says they've been set back years. It's worth remembering we just don't know the answer to this, and really what we need is some kind of settled deal. Now, Donald Trump did speak to this as well, and he suggested that you get more you attract more, flies with honey than vinegar, basically. And he talked about this idea about reducing sanctions against Iran, but he outright denies this claim that the United States might consider sending $30 billion to Iran. But he did acknowledge that the Trump administration would be open to reducing or entirely removing sanctions against Iran if they had some kind of deal that would prevent Iran from enriching uranium while allowing Iran to open up to the global economy. This is not surprising, but in that article where we heard talk that Donald Trump is considering helping Iran restart a peaceful nuclear energy program, provide $30 billion in assistance, and remove sanctions, Donald Trump has bluntly acknowledged that, yeah, we are open to removing sanctions. He's just denying this $30 billion piece, probably because, we even talked about this last week where we're like, bro, that's exactly what you crapped on Obama for, was sending the Iranians money. And so I think Donald Trump is really recoiling from that idea now. And so while he calls it fake news, it's possible that he's just recoiling because of the reaction that's occurred in social media. President Trump said, okay, let's see here. Government officials speculating as to why the strikes were not as destructive as anticipated. These communications were intended to be private. The existence of the intercepted communications has not been disputed by the White House. We'll see. More information will come out over time, but what we really need is a deal. And I'm still a little bit frustrated that Donald Trump is of the mindset that we don't need a written deal. I don't know if that's because he knows that they're not willing to do a written deal, or if it's because Iran has been pretty blunt that we're not going to give up enriching uranium, don't even bother. Remember, that's why those European negotiations failed between the Iranians, the U.S. delegations, and Europeans. That's why negotiations failed the first time, and that's what ended up leading to the strikes, because the negotiations had previously already failed. Here's that WAPO piece, by the way. The U.S. obtained intercepted communications that the attack was less devastating than they had expected, according to 4 people familiar with the classified intelligence circulating within the U.S. government. The communication, intended to be private, included speculations about why the strikes were not as effective, but that they were not as effective as thought. Intercepted signals that the intelligence community's preliminary information is offering a more complicated picture than one conveyed by the president. Yeah, that's not a surprise. Trump administration did not dispute the existence of the intercepted comms. You can expect the press secretary to get asked about this. It's shameful the WAPO is helping people commit felonies by publishing out-of-context leaks. Well, there you go. There's the press secretary. I wasn't expecting that to be in the next sentence. Analysts broadly agree that the strikes have involved immense firepower, but the extent of destruction and how long it may take Iran to rebuild has been hotly debated. Iran moved its amid reports that Iran moved its stockpile. We highly believe that Iran moved its stockpile. Donald Trump strongly disputes this idea, but that's okay. I mean, it's not that much stuff to move. It would have been very easy for Iran to move their highly enriched uranium. So when asked about the communication, a Trump administration official says the Iranians were wrong because we've destroyed their metal conversion facility. We know that our weapons were delivered precisely where we wanted them to be delivered and had the effect we wanted. Obviously, some of this is going to be political posturing to try to set up negotiations. A single phone call between unnamed Iranians is not the same as an intelligence assessment. Fair. Intercepted phone calls, emails, and comms, known as signals intelligence, are some of the most powerful tools in the U.S. spy agencies. Right, the CIA sends signals. But signals intelligence also has limitations, as overheard snippets of conversations sometimes lack context. Totally fair. Trump has been furious about the news conference. Democrats are the ones who leaked the information. Okay, we kind of get the idea here. So, Capitol Hill, disagreements about the effectiveness remained. You cannot bomb knowledge out of existence. No matter how many scientists you kill, there's still people in Iran who know how to work centrifuges. And if they still have enriched uranium, they still have the ability to use centrifuges. And you're not setting the program back by years. You're setting the program back by months. Yeah, I kind of agree that, within 6 months, they could probably be up and operating again somewhere, especially at the Pyramid Mountain facility, which they just, they didn't touch at all with their strikes. And that's supposedly a substantially deeper, like 300-foot deep facility that has potentially thousands of centrifuges. So that'll be very interesting to see where that goes. Let's see all comments. 4,000 comments on a Washington Post piece? I feel like these are going to be bots. Let's see. Latest. Let's go to recommended. Recommended. That means Trump was lying to us. Who would have guessed that? Okay, the only thing they obliterated was Whiskey Pete Hegseth. Oh, they're trying to come up with nicknames for Pete. If only we hadn't just lobotomized the entire U.S. intelligence agency. This is talking about like Doge cuts. I don't know that that's exactly what happened. I think that's a little extreme. Anyway, okay, so we talked Bessent, we talked Hassett. Kevin Hassett didn't really honestly say much. He kind of punted this idea that, hey, are you open to being, Fed chair or whatever? Donald Trump did say nice things about him, suggesting that Kevin is a very talented guy and he wouldn't be doing what Powell is doing. Basically, Powell is a very bad guy, Donald Trump said. And we talked about Iran, we talked about the tariff negotiations. So that's kind of an update on what we heard from the Trump team this morning. We'll see what other news comes out. So as usual, like and subscribe to get more information.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.